Our theme this month is growing through the cycle of life. And today's topic is acknowledge. The one word, acknowledge. In the Cambridge English Dictionary, we find the definition of acknowledge as follows: to accept, to admit, or to recognize something. And in the Science of Mind text, on the chapter on physical perfection, we find Ernest Holmes' statement saying this: always one should be conscious of the idea of the wholeness of life, perfect function at every point. And though we may recognize a specific condition, and he puts the word condition in parentheses, whether physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, we do not acknowledge it as a permanent entity. That's a really important thing to remember. We do not recognize it or acknowledge it as a permanent entity. To ignore its impact on our lives up until now, when it has been impacting us negatively, or to pretend that its effect is inevitable and eternal, is bringing the past into the present in every moment, rather than releasing it and replacing it. So instead, wouldn't you prefer to replace that with something more interesting, healthier, more satisfying? You can just nod your heads. Yes, I would. I am. I do. Why not? This is one of the reasons why the argumentative step in spiritual mind treatment is so powerful. This step is so valuable and so important when our doubt and or our fear overrides the words we speak in treatment, because we're thinking about the events and or the negative effects of the past. And incidentally, folks, that doubt and or fear could be for ourselves, for friends, for relatives, or the whole world around us. So it's not that each one of us in our spiritual practice pretends that there are no negatives in our past, nor does the practitioner when he or she does a spiritual mind treatment for us, but rather that we acknowledge that very thing that has brought us to this present moment. It's all a part of who and what we have been up to this moment. It's about being a part of who and what was brought to me or has brought me to this moment in eternity. This is the function, always moving, whether it's forward or sideways, sometimes backward, but we are always moving in consciousness. And now as I acknowledge my role in my spiritual unfolding, and I'm ready to acknowledge that there are some things to bless and release from my subconscious, which keeps kind of edging its way up into my consciousness, when or if it no longer serves me. Because once I release it, let go, relax, surrender, then I can replace it with what does serve me. Holmes sometimes refers to that as creating harmony out of chaos. You know, I love it when he slips these little things in, like he does on page 52. He kind of slips that in. And this, when I was preparing this talk, I read that for the first time. Now, I didn't read it for the first time. I saw it for the first time because it fit what I was talking about, creating harmony out of chaos. And you've undoubtedly heard me to refer to it like this: you cannot deny what you do not acknowledge exists or has existed in the past. You cannot deny what you do not do not acknowledge exists. So first you've got to bring it forward and then release it. Otherwise it continues to kind of simmer below the surface, doesn't it? And it pops up at these strange and unusual moments, and you think, God, I was sure I dealt with that 16 years ago, and again 12 years ago, and here it is a third time. When does it end? It ends when I stop denying that it has had existence and I let it go to replace it with what serves me now. And that's the argumentative step in spiritual mind treatment. So here's some more words from Dr. Holmes. The argumentative method of spiritual mind treatment is a series of affirmations and denials for the purpose of building up in mind a state of realization and acceptance. The power is in the realization, but there is also power in the argument. And in doing the treatment, one must realize and believe that there is a universal power and presence responding to his or her word. Holmes calls that conviction building up faith, turning away from the negative by replacing it with powerful expectation and acceptance of the positive. The demonstration, or the accomplishment of intention, is made when the one treating experiences the desired results. It's where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? When I see it, and I feel it, and I accept it, now it's real. And Holmes reminds us that the possibility of demonstration does not depend on the environment around us, the condition itself, our location, our personality, or opportunity. It depends solely upon our belief, our acceptance, and our willingness to comply with the law. And the law that he refers to here, of course, is that everyone who asks receives, according to his or her belief. And I'm sure that sounds familiar to you. That's another clear way of saying read page 52. He says it a number of times in the text. Look for it. And it'll always take you back to page 52. When I speak my word, positive or negative, that's what transpires. Some time ago, I did a talk titled, If You Want a Better Life, Tell a Better Story. And how many of you remember that talk? A couple of you, yeah. Some of you, of course, were not attending then, or you may not have been there that Sunday. So, of course, you wouldn't remember it. And for those of you who do remember it, maybe I'll just do an updated kind of encore on that talk later this month. Because growing through the cycle of life, for each of us, the demands that we update our story or stories is really important. So when we look at that kind of thing, if you want a better life, tell a better story, that's pretty good advice, isn't it? As we work through acknowledging our old tapes, old stories, old habits, in order to grow and to improve these better days of our lives that we're living now, we can develop more skilled ways of putting into our consciousness and into our subconscious the kind of stories that support our evolved selves. It makes sense, doesn't it? How can the evolved me continue to operate with all or even any of those old, negative, sick, unable, doubting, or criticizing ideas about myself. They don't serve me anymore. And for sure, I don't want to serve them anymore. Besides, nobody records on tape anyway, do they? Not anymore. CDs, yes. Voice memos on your cell phone, yes. Updating, storage on flash drives? Yeah. Updating your subconscious? Yes. If you haven't already, let's start right now. And we're not the only folks on the planet who recognize the power of our stories and the impact that has on this thing we call life. So I have a new book and a new author to share with you. Recently I was gifted with this book called The Power of Story by Jim Lohr. Dr. Lohr is a psychologist. He's an author, a speaker, a personal coach, and the co-founder of the turn the page. The Human Performance Institute. I bring this information to you because one of the things that drew me to the science of mind in general and to this organization's Centers for Spiritual Living is that its ideas and practices are not confined to just our talks or our classes. They're also out there in the world, and they're being taught and practiced in a wide variety of different ways for the improvement and growth for mental, physical, emotional, as well as spiritual health. In working with clients, Jim Lohr reminds them that your life is the most important story you will ever tell. And you are telling it in every moment. From very early on in our lives, he says, we are spinning and telling multiple stories about our lives, publicly and privately, meaning we talk to ourselves about them. Some stories have a theme, others a tone, perhaps a premise, and here's the kicker, whether we realize it or not. Some of our stories, he says, are for the better. Some are for the worst. But no one lacks material. Everybody's got a story. Perhaps, and he says, thank goodness everybody has a story. Because our capacity to tell stories is, he believes, just about our profoundest gift. Perhaps the true power of the story is an unvarnished depiction an unvarnished depiction of current reality. Just an aside here. I emphasize the word current in that statement. And so does he. When he coaches people to renew their stories, which is what he calls our profoundest gift. Perhaps the true power of the story is an unvarnished depiction of current reality. Here's one of his examples that speaks to our theme this month, the theme being growing through the cycle of life. In Jim Lohr's words, story is everywhere. Your body tells a story. The smile or frown on your face, your shoulders thrust back in confidence or slumped roundly in despair, the liveliness of the fatigue in your gait, the sparkle of hope and joy in your eyes, or the blank stare, your fitness, the size of your waist, the tone and strength of your physical being. And he goes on to say that unhealthy storytelling of any kind is characterized by a diet of faulty thinking and ultimately long-term negative consequence. So he relates this to how we feed our body or not, to how we feed our minds or not. And he goes on to say that unhealthy storytelling of any kind is characterized by a diet of faulty thinking. Obviously, his book, his practice, and his clients are directed toward what he calls rewriting their stories. Now, for some of you who are taking classes, taking this current class with me, one of the way of rewriting our story is journaling. It's not a popular word among our classmates. There are some of us who really are not into journaling. And yet, Emma Curtis Hopkins strongly recommends it, urges that we do it, but we do it for a different reason perhaps than what we have believed journaling to be in the past. And this, the way he talks about rewriting your story, is not unlike what she's talking about in the journaling, of staying in the present and moving forward rather than spilling all the past and going back and reading it every day for the next 12 years. Which does what? Keeps us in the past. What he's talking about, what she's talking about, what I'm talking about, is the journaling of what's unfolding in this moment, and this moment, and this moment. Dr. Laura's philosophy, Change Your Story, Change Your Destiny, has a lot of correlation with the writings and classes brought forward by our coach, Ernest Holmes. The philosophy of spiritual mind healing is based upon the conception that we are living in a universe of intelligence, that thoughts are things, that definite states of consciousness operate through a creative field and reproduce themselves in form. When there is doubt or fear, our spiritual mind treatment work includes that argumentative step of denial toward any false condition that opposes the principle of life as one of absolute perfection. We do that by denying it any power, and we turn to its opposite, to the realization of health, happiness, and harmony. You remember one time not too long ago I said that the mind operating at the level of the human holds one thought at a time. And you get to choose which thought that is. Now you can go back and forth between thoughts, one at a time. However, you can also stay on the one you choose. Assumedly, that would be the positive one. So that you are what? You are de-energizing the negative. You are no longer giving it attention. You're no longer feeding it. In his book, Living the Science of Mind, Holmes reminds us that we do not deny the existence of the physical universe. The objective universe is the body of God, and that body includes our physical being. The universe is how we name the divine in the human, for every person is a unique manifestation of the whole, a microcosm within the macrocosm. Rooted in the infinite, we personify it. God incarnate in every human form is what we're talking about here. Not only humans manifest divinity too. Everything that exists is a manifestation of the divine mind. But the divine mind, being inexhaustible and limitless, is never caught or trapped in any form. That is a really important thing that I have to say, I didn't notice that Holmes had written exactly that until I started working on this talk. And you know where I got the quote? From Emmett Fox online. He was quoting Holmes on a number of things related to what I'm talking about. And up that jumped. That divine mind, being inexhaustible and limitless, is never caught or trapped in any form. So now, if you are a part of that divine mind, that says a lot from the standpoint of, and you don't need to be trapped either. Holmes says, it's merely expressed by that form based on the knowledge, faith, and trust that the form puts forth. The form being you or me or whatever. But only based on the knowledge, faith, and trust. How important it is that we do our spiritual practices to develop those things so that we're acting out of divine intelligence by means of each one of us. So, on your path to this cycle of life, acknowledge that one of our most valuable gifts, powerful gifts, is the understanding and use of spiritual mind treatment as a direct link with that divine mind. That as you speak your words clearly, and we talk about clarity all the time, we talk about the intention before we begin the treatment. And now we're talking about that argumentative step when somewhere in the midst of the treatment you're doing, either out loud or in your mind, the doubt creeps up. Or the remembrance that the last time or the last 12 times you did this treatment, it didn't work. When that begins to happen, it's time to stop, do that denial step, the argumentative step that says, I no longer grant this any power. I'm through with this. It no longer serves me. And then you restate your intention and continue and finish the treatment. So nips doubt, fear, hesitation, nips it in the bud when we acknowledge it so we can deny it. If you don't acknowledge it, you have nothing to deny. When you have nothing to deny, it continues to grow and fester and show up. Remember that it's allness, that is God, spirit, creative energy. Its allness represents all possibilities for that which it creates. And remember, too, that despite the negative conditions that we bring upon ourselves, consciously or unconsciously, the use of the process of denial of that negative and the replacement of it with our highest and best good in all areas of our lives is as easy as acknowledging it in a step called argumentative, in denying it any power, reiterating what you choose in place, completing your spiritual practice with expectation and acceptance of what you have put in there as your intention is the only thing now that's in there. And the rest of it dies for lack of attention. And so it is.